The sound of scratching came just before sunrise, not loud, just steady enough to pull Sandra from her dream like a tug on a frayed sleeve. She sat up fast, heart thudding. The side gate was rattling again. Moxie was gone. Outside, the morning was damp and bluish, that in-between hour where the world still held its breath. Sandra stepped into the courtyard barefoot, each blade of grass icy against her skin. Her Jack Russell had vanished through the fence slats, the same gap she swore she had fixed last night. Across the shared hedge, a familiar figure waited, a stocky little pug with one ear flopped backward like it never learned how to behave. He stood still, tail wagging, eyes locked on something behind him. Then Sandra saw her Moxie, perched on the neighbor's stone path like a statue, just watching him. No barking, no chase, just presence. It was the fourth morning in a row. Sandra opened her mouth to call out, but something in the way Moxie turned, deliberate, slow, almost shy, stopped her. The neighbor's sliding door began to open.
Like the video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for daily emotional dog stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update.
The sun had not yet risen when the first sound reached Sandra's ears. It was not loud, but it was persistent, a faint scratching, like something small and determined was nudging against metal. Sandra sat up, bleary-eyed and unsure whether it was part of her dream or something real. Then came the clink of a tag against a collar, sharp in the stillness. Her heart sank. Moxie had slipped out again. She threw on a cardigan, still warm from yesterday's shift, and stepped out into the cold breath of early morning. The courtyard between the townhouses shimmered with dew, every blade of grass holding its own tiny universe. Her bare feet soaked through in seconds. The side gate, which she had bungee-tied shut just hours before, hung open like a mouth caught mid-lie. A trail of tiny paw prints led through the gap. Sandra followed them across the courtyard. Over the hedge, at the edge of the next unit's lawn, she spotted him, the little pug. Stocky, fawn-colored, with one ear that never quite stood right. He looked back at her, tongue lolling, as if to say he had been expecting them. Moxie was already there. She sat on the stone path like she belonged to it, her body still, her tail flicking once every few seconds. There was a hush in the air, the kind that comes before a moment you know you will remember. Sandra watched from the shadows, heart swelling despite herself. This was not just curiosity anymore. This was ritual. For the fourth morning in a row, her clever little terrier had escaped to meet this strange dog. Sandra had tried to be stern the first time. The second time, she had double-checked the gate. By the third, she started wondering if Moxie was trying to tell her something she could not say. Sandra stepped closer. Moxie's ears flicked back, but she did not move. The pug took a few waddling steps forward and sat, mimicking her posture. They looked at each other like they had their own language. Then the neighbor's sliding door creaked open. A silhouette appeared, tall, in flannel pajama pants, cradling a coffee mug like it was the last warm thing in the world. Sandra tensed. They had never spoken beyond nods. The man blinked down at the two dogs, then noticed her standing in the courtyard, half hiding behind her gate. He did not say a word, just sipped his coffee, watching the scene like it was a play meant for one audience. Sandra gave a sheepish wave, unsure whether to call out or apologize. The man simply nodded again, slow, almost understanding. Moxie finally turned toward Sandra. Her eyes were bright, her body language relaxed in a way Sandra had not seen in weeks. She had been restless lately, pacing, whining at odd hours, never satisfied with walks or toys. Now she looked like a dog with purpose. Sandra knelt and held out her arms. Moxie came trotting back, but not before licking the pug on the nose, a soft, quick gesture that made Sandra pause. There was a spark there, not just affection, but intent. Back inside, she dried Moxie's paws and gave her breakfast, but the dog barely touched it. She sat by the sliding glass door, ears up, eyes trained on the hedge. Waiting, Sandra ran a hand through her hair, already feeling the ache of the upcoming shift. 12 hours on her feet, back-to-back patients, blinking fluorescent lights. She had planned to nap before work. Instead, she found herself staring out the window, watching a pug lie down just on the other side of the fence, as if waiting for Moxie to return. The next morning, Sandra set her alarm for 5 minutes earlier. When the scratching started again, she was already halfway dressed. She opened the back door without hesitation and followed Moxie into the chill. This time she stayed close enough to see what happened. Moxie slowed before the hedge, then crawled under it belly-low, emerging with a wag that could have lit the sky. The pug barked once, short, surprised, delighted. Moxie licked his face. Then she dropped a tiny plush squirrel at his paws. Sandra blinked. The toy had gone missing a week ago. She watched as the two dogs shared it, taking turns nudging it, then sitting side by side like an old couple watching the sunrise. She leaned against the fence post, heart full and hurting all at once. There was something sacred about it, the way they touched noses, the way Moxie looked back at Sandra as if asking for just a few more minutes. That night, she could not stop thinking about it. The next day, she left the gate unlocked. It rained that morning, a slow, soaking drizzle that turned the grass to mush and made her bones ache before she even got out of bed. Still, Moxie went. She came back muddy, wet, but glowing with the same quiet joy. Sandra towel-dried her and made an extra cup of coffee for herself. Her body screamed for rest, but something in her wanted to follow. By the fifth morning, it was not just a routine, it was a pilgrimage. Sandra stood at the kitchen counter, mug in hand, eyes locked on the back door. The world outside was silver with fog, the hedge barely visible. Moxie paced by the door, tail stiff with anticipation. Sandra opened it. "Go on then," she whispered, though no words came. Moxie bolted through the gap. But this time the pug was not there. Moxie froze, sniffed, circled the stone path. She pawed at the neighbor's gate and whined once, low and uncertain. Then a car door slammed. Moxie jerked back. Sandra ran barefoot into the mist. The slam of the car door cracked through the fog like a warning shot. Moxie bolted from the neighbor's gate and disappeared into the hedge with her body low and tail tucked, her ears flat against her skull. Sandra's breath caught in her throat as she jogged barefoot across the slick grass, barely registering the cold this time. Beyond the hedge, the driveway was slick with rain and tire tracks. A small hatchback idled near the curb, its rear door wide open. The man, the pug's owner, stood beside it, loading a worn duffel bag into the trunk. His movements were slow, distracted. The pug sat on the top step, leash already clipped to his collar, ears perked toward the hedge like he was waiting for something to stop him. Moxie stood just inside the shrubs, hidden except for her tail. Sandra crouched beside her, heart hammering. The little terrier let out a soft whine. The man looked up and saw them both. He gave a tired nod. Then he knelt and scratched the pug gently under the chin. The dog leaned into the touch but kept glancing back at the hedge. Sandra saw it, the tension in the leash, the resistance in his tiny paws. He did not want to leave, and just like that the trunk slammed shut. The man walked the pug to the car, lifting him gently into the back seat as if he weighed nothing. Sandra felt her chest tighten. She had no idea what to say or do. It was not her place. They had never even exchanged names, but Moxie took a step forward. She slipped out from the hedge, one cautious paw after another, tail wagging slowly like she was unsure if she was allowed. The man paused by the driver's side. He watched her approach the car. The pug's face appeared in the window, his breath fogging the glass. Moxie stood on her hind legs and placed her front paws on the door. The man hesitated. Then he lowered the window just enough for their noses to meet. They did not bark. They did not yelp or whine. They just sat there nose to nose, a shared breath in the cold morning air. It was a goodbye. Moxie blinked slowly, then dropped back to the ground and walked away without looking back. The car drove off moments later. Sandra stood there beside her dog, both of them wet and still, watching the taillights disappear down the hill. Moxie did not cry, but something in her body folded inward. They returned to their side of the hedge, slower than usual. Moxie bypassed the door and lay down on the porch mat, chin on her paws. Sandra sat beside her, unsure whether to speak. The silence between them was heavier than any leash. That afternoon, the courtyard felt hollow. The pug's absence was not loud. It was the silence where his bark should have been, the untouched chew toy still lying on the neighbor's porch, the way Moxie glanced at the hedge every few minutes as if he might come trotting back through it. Sandra had seen heartbreak in her patients, in waiting rooms, in ER corners where no one should have to receive news. She had seen it on tired parents' faces and in her own reflection after long nights with no sleep. But she had never seen it in a dog until now. Over the next week, Moxie stopped eating full meals. She still walked, but her steps lacked purpose. The energy that once zipped through her legs like fire had faded to embers. She stopped chasing squirrels. She stopped barking at delivery trucks. She even stopped her evening patrol of the windowsill. Sandra tried everything, new treats, a new squeaky toy. Even a soft new blanket with paw prints. Nothing worked. Then one evening, Sandra sat on the couch with a warm bowl of soup, feet tucked under her, and Moxie jumped up beside her. She did not curl up like usual. Instead, she pressed her side tightly against Sandra's leg and sighed, one of those deep, full-body sighs that said everything words never could. Sandra placed a hand on her head. Moxie leaned in. Something changed in that moment. The next morning, Sandra woke early again, out of habit or hope, she could not say. She opened the door and let Moxie out into the yard, though she knew no one was waiting. She watched as the dog walked the perimeter, sniffed the air, and then trotted straight for the hedge. But instead of squeezing through, Moxie sat. She just sat. Sandra watched from the doorway, unsure what her dog was doing. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. Just sitting, ears up, eyes fixed on the spot where the pug used to be. And then she barked. Not loud, not frantic, just one single deliberate bark. A statement, a memory, a declaration. Then she got up and trotted back inside, tail lifted slightly, not wagging, but no longer dragging. Sandra blinked back something warm and stinging. That evening, Sandra walked Moxie past the row of townhouses. It was quiet. The porch where the pug had lived was empty now. No toys, no leash, no water bowl. But Moxie still paused, sniffed the ground, then sat for a moment. She looked up at Sandra and waited. Sandra crouched down and kissed the top of her head. The wind rustled through the courtyard, carrying with it the scent of summer grass and distant rain. Moxie stood, gave a little shake, and continued on. As they walked, Sandra realized she was not thinking about work, not about the stack of charts waiting for her, not about the aching feet or the flickering fluorescent lights. Just the moment, just the dog at her side, just the way healing begins quietly. Then without warning, Moxie stopped. Her ears shot up, she sniffed the air, her entire body tensed. From somewhere beyond the hedges, a familiar bark rang out, short, sharp, unmistakable. Moxie bolted. The sound had been faint, just a single bark from across the courtyard. But Moxie had no doubt. Her ears locked forward, her eyes went wide, and in one heartbeat she was gone, her small frame streaking across the damp lawn like a lightning bolt of fur and hope. Sandra stumbled after her, heart caught in her throat. Moxie tore through the hedge, squeezing beneath it with practiced ease. For a moment, Sandra lost sight of her. Then she heard it again, that bark. This time there were two. She followed blindly, forgetting shoes, forgetting her mug on the porch railing, forgetting everything except the pounding in her chest. Her hands parted the hedge, dew-drenched leaves soaking her sleeves. Her breath caught as she stepped into the neighbor's yard. There, under the now empty porch, stood the pug. He was muddier than before, his coat slightly tangled, but his tail wagged with the same offbeat rhythm. Moxie had already reached him. They circled each other in tight loops, sniffing, bumping shoulders, then sitting together like neither had ever been apart. Sandra scanned the yard for the man, for a suitcase, for a car, anything to explain why the dog was back. But the house looked quiet, windows dark, porch light off, no sign of movement. Then the screen door creaked. The man stepped out, rubbing his eyes with one hand, a folded blanket in the other. He saw Sandra and froze. They stood in that still morning air, separated by a few yards of wet grass and two reunited dogs, not quite knowing who should speak first. Finally, he gave a slow nod, the same kind she had come to recognize, quiet acknowledgement, a kind of apology wrapped in understanding. He knelt by the pug and picked a burr from the dog's leg. Then he looked up and spoke gently, more to the dog than to her. He had gotten out, crawled under the gate at his sister's place, walked over a mile, probably, found his way back here, back home. Sandra's throat tightened. The word home hung in the air. The man stood slowly. He seemed tired. His voice, when he continued, was softer than she had expected. He said the move had been sudden, temporary. He was staying with family while sorting out job stuff. He had come back to check the place just for the weekend, had not expected company. Sandra looked down at the dogs. Moxie had placed one paw on the pug's back like she was afraid he might vanish again. The man took a step closer. Then another. Sandra smiled, small and unsure, and finally said something, just a hello. He returned it, voice warm now, a little steadier. They stood there watching the dogs reunite in silence, as if neither wanted to interrupt something sacred. Later that day, they all met again at the hedge. Moxie was already waiting by the gap when Sandra opened the back door. Sandra walked out with a leash in one hand and two travel mugs in the other. The man, now introduced as Liam, met her at the gate with a shy smile and the pug tucked under one arm like a loaf of bread. His name was Murphy, he said, short for Murphy's Law, because everything that could go wrong with him had. Sandra laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks. They let the dogs roam the courtyard as they sat on opposite sides of the hedge. Liam explained how Murphy had always been an escape artist, even as a puppy. how his last rental would not allow dogs, how this place had been a fluke, 1 year of peace, then back to uncertainty. Sandra listened, sipping her coffee. She found herself telling him about the hospital, the night shifts, the exhaustion that clung to her even after 12 hours of sleep, the way Moxie had been her anchor, her reason to get up. Their words meandered like the dogs, circling, pausing, then returning with new threads. By late afternoon, Sandra stood and stretched. Liam did the same. Their mugs were empty, their dogs now curled together in the grass. Before heading inside, Liam asked if they could meet again tomorrow. Sandra nodded. Over the next few days, the hedge became their meeting point, sometimes early in the morning before work, sometimes late when the courtyard lights buzzed and the grass gleamed silver in the moonlight. Moxie and Murphy developed a rhythm, playful chases, shared naps, synchronized tail wags, and Sandra and Liam began to unfold. They spoke of small things at first, favorite meals, worst neighbors, the weather. Then deeper things, family fractures, quiet heartbreaks, the loneliness of routines. Sandra found herself smiling more, laughing, looking forward to mornings again. One evening, after a particularly long shift, Sandra returned home to find something tucked beneath her door, a tiny plush squirrel. It looked identical to the one Moxie had brought Murphy weeks ago. Attached to its leg was a folded note, just 2 words, from Murphy. She laughed so hard she cried. The next morning, she returned the gesture, a chew bone tied with a red ribbon placed on Liam's porch. The dogs played messenger. The courtship continued, but not everything was seamless. One morning, Liam arrived at the hedge later than usual. He looked off, his smile dim, his posture slouched. Sandra asked what was wrong. His lease was ending, 2 weeks left. His sister's couch would not cut it anymore. He was looking, but rentals were tight. Sandra felt something hollow open in her chest. She looked at the dogs, nose to nose beneath the hedge. That afternoon, she walked her usual loop with Moxie. They paused by Liam's porch. Murphy barked once from behind the screen door. Moxie barked back. Sandra looked down at her dog and asked quietly, more to herself than anyone else, "What if we found a way?" That night, she could not sleep. The next morning, she woke before her alarm. Moxie stood ready at the door, ears perked. Sandra knelt beside her, pressed her forehead to hers, and whispered one simple promise. She would not let them be pulled apart again. Then she heard the sound of a suitcase zipper. The zipper cut through the morning air like a warning bell. Sandra opened the door and stepped onto the porch with a pit in her stomach. Across the courtyard, Liam stood beside a suitcase. Murphy sat at his feet, looking up with wide, unsure eyes. It was real this time. No weekend visit, no surprise return. Moxie bolted past her before Sandra could say a word. She crossed the yard in seconds, stopped short of the suitcase, and whined low in her throat. Murphy perked up, barked once, and dashed toward her. The 2 dogs collided with such force that Sandra winced, not from pain but from the sheer emotion in it. They circled, touched noses. Moxie pawed at the suitcase. Murphy nuzzled her cheek. Sandra swallowed hard. Liam looked up and gave a sheepish smile. He said the unit had sold faster than expected. The buyers wanted it empty by the weekend. He had packed most of his things already. The rest would go today. He knelt beside the dogs, scratching them both behind the ears. Sandra walked over slowly, feeling the weight of something inevitable pressing against her ribs. They talked, quietly, the way people do when time is short and nothing feels like enough. He told her he had found a temporary place, 1 town over, no dogs allowed, just for now, until something better came through. Sandra did not ask why he would take it. She knew. Sometimes life did not wait for ideal. She crouched beside Moxie, who now sat glued to Murphy's side like she could hold him in place with proximity alone. Sandra asked gently if they could have one last walk. Liam nodded. They took the dogs down the back path behind the townhouses, where the ivy crept over brick walls and the fences dipped low enough for squirrels to taunt from above. The sky was overcast but dry. The air smelled like rain that had changed its mind. Moxie and Murphy walked side by side the entire way. Their tails brushed. They shared every scent patch, every puddle. At one point, Murphy dropped his stick. Moxie picked it up and carried it for him. When they returned, the courtyard felt different, too quiet, too open. Liam clipped Murphy's leash. Moxie watched, unmoving, as the little pug was led to the car. Sandra crouched to her dog's level and whispered soft things into her fur, words she barely understood herself. Liam paused before getting in. He looked at Sandra, really looked at her, as if memorizing the moment. He opened his mouth like he might say something else, then stopped. He smiled, said goodbye, the door shut. The engine started. and then they were gone. Sandra stayed there with Moxie for a long time, the leash dangling from her wrist, her hand resting on the space Murphy used to fill. That night the porch light stayed off. Moxie paced for hours. She kept checking the gate, the hedge, the yard. She sniffed the plush squirrel 3 times, then pushed it under the couch. Sandra did not sleep much. In the days that followed, she tried to keep their rhythm. She still woke early, still opened the back door. Still made 2 mugs of coffee out of habit, even if the second one went cold. Moxie walked slower, slept more, barked less. The hedge began to overgrow. Then, 5 days later, something changed. Sandra returned from work just after sunset, exhausted and numb. The sky was the color of copper. She opened the door and found Moxie sitting alert on the mat, tail tapping. Her ears were up, her eyes locked on the hedge. Sandra followed her gaze. There, tied to the base of the porch light, was a red ribbon, and dangling from the ribbon, a silver dog tag. Sandra stepped closer. The tag had no name on it, just one word etched clean across the back. Soon, her breath caught. She looked around the courtyard, but no one was there. The lights in Liam's unit were still off, empty, but someone had been here. Moxie barked once, short. Sure, Sandra smiled for the first time in days. Each morning after that, she checked the light. One day there was a tennis ball. Another day, a crumpled napkin with a paw print stamped in ink. Then a chew toy in the shape of a heart. She started leaving things too. A note wrapped around a dog biscuit. A keychain shaped like a house. A sketch she had made on a napkin during a lunch break. 2 dogs side by side, a hedge between them, tails touching. And then the ribbon changed colors, from red to yellow. Then green, and one morning it was blue, tied in a perfect knot, with a small metal key hanging from it. No note, just the key. That evening she waited on the porch after her shift. Moxie paced by the gate, ears flicking at every sound. The sun dipped below the trees. The sky turned dark. Then headlights appeared at the end of the row. A familiar hatchback rolled slowly into view. Sandra stood, heart racing. The car parked. The engine stopped. The door opened. Liam stepped out. He looked different, a little more rested, cleaner shave, eyes bright even in the dusk. Murphy jumped down from the back seat, leash trailing, and barked twice, sharp, certain, joyful. Moxie yelped and sprinted across the yard. They met by the hedge like they had never been apart, like no days had passed, like everything was still possible. Sandra stepped forward. Liam met her halfway. They stood there, inches apart, watching the dogs collapse into a tangle of fur and joy. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded lease, said he found a place nearby, dog-friendly. Month to month, nothing fancy, but it had a shared courtyard and a low fence, and a gate that did not quite latch right. Sandra took the paper, glanced at it, then looked up at him. She asked if he had signed it yet. He said no. She said good, because there was one more option he had not considered. Then she turned toward her own front door. The porch light was on, and the door was already open. The porch light bathed the doorway in gold as Sandra stepped back, leaving the door open behind her. She did not say a word, just looked at Liam, then at Moxie and Murphy rolling in the grass like the world was made only for them. Liam stood still for a long moment, the unsigned lease still in his hand. Then he smiled, not the tentative kind he had used before, but one that reached all the tired places behind his eyes. He walked toward her slowly, each step shedding doubt like old skin. He stopped just shy of the threshold. She tilted her head slightly and said nothing, letting the silence carry the question. He looked at the key she still wore on a string around her neck, the one he had left tied with that blue ribbon. Then he looked past her into the house, where a bowl of dog food already waited beside Moxie's. 2 bowls now. Inside, it smelled like vanilla candles and rain-damp blankets. Home. Liam took a breath and stepped through the door. Moxie and Murphy followed like shadows, tails up, eyes wide, unsure at first, then certain. They trotted into the kitchen and flopped down side by side, panting like they had just run miles, though all they had crossed was a courtyard and a decision. That night no one said much. Liam unpacked slowly, setting his duffel bag near the coat rack, laying Murphy's bed beside Moxie's. Sandra made tea. They sat on the couch with tired backs and warm mugs, the kind of comfortable silence that only people who have shared quiet heartbreaks can hold. The dogs slept in a pile, pressed so close together they looked like one creature. Sandra reached for the lease on the table, folded it twice, and slid it into the recycling bin. The next morning, Sandra woke before her alarm again, but not from habit this time. It was from the sound of paws, 2 sets, skittering across the hardwood floor toward the back door. She sat up and smiled. The hedge still stood at the edge of the courtyard, but the overgrowth had been trimmed back the night before. The gate still stuck slightly, just enough to give a dog like Moxie a challenge. Murphy had already learned how to nudge it open with his nose. Sandra and Liam stood side by side on the porch, coffee mugs warming their hands. The sky was streaked with the first pinks of sunrise. The courtyard glowed. Moxie and Murphy darted into the yard and began their usual dance: sniff, circle, bark, wag. It was the same routine but different now, fuller, rooted. They no longer had to sneak time. The humans stepped down onto the grass. Sandra reached out and touched Liam's arm just lightly, and he responded by lacing his fingers with hers like it was the most natural thing in the world. The days that followed unfolded gently. They rearranged furniture. They found a rhythm. Some mornings Liam cooked. Some nights Sandra worked late and Liam walked both dogs under the stars. The routines they had once held separately began to braid into one. But the dogs had always known. Moxie was brighter now, livelier. She had always been clever, but now she was also content. Murphy mirrored her, matching her pace, copying her tilt of the head, even barking when she barked just to harmonize. The courtyard, once just grass and a hedge, became a world. Liam brought home stepping stones and built a winding path. Sandra planted a patch of lavender by the gate. The dogs made trails of their own, weaving figure eights with their paws until the grass flattened. Neighbors noticed. Some waved more. One or two even asked about the new dog. Sandra always smiled and said, "He is not new, he just found his way back." Weeks passed. Then, one evening, Sandra returned from a shift to find a surprise waiting on the porch. A small wooden sign, hand-painted, it read, "The Gate Between Homes." It hung just above the gate where the hedge met the fence. Underneath it, 2 dog tags hung side by side, one silver, one brass. She looked down at the yard where Moxie and Murphy wrestled in the late sun, panting and grinning and glowing. Liam stepped out behind her, towel slung over his shoulder, smelling faintly of sawdust and paint. She leaned into him, warm and tired and whole. Later that night, as the dogs snored in their corner and the wind tapped lightly against the window panes, Liam asked a quiet question. Had she ever imagined this? Sandra shook her head. Not even close. She had imagined peace maybe, routine, silence, but not this. Not laughter at midnight over spilled kibble. Not 2 dogs chasing each other through sheets hung out to dry. Not tea mugs sitting side by side on the railing, fogging the morning air. Not love found not in grand gestures, but in daily offerings, a toy left at the door, a note on the fridge, a leash hung beside another. And definitely not a dog matchmaking her with a pug's human through a fence. But Moxie had always known better. The next morning, they woke to birdsong and sunshine, a morning that felt like it belonged to someone else, someone in a postcard or a story. Moxie nudged Sandra's leg. Murphy barked once at the door. Liam stretched and stood, one arm reaching for the ceiling, the other fumbling for the coffee pot. Sandra let the dogs out, watched them disappear toward the hedge, then turned back inside. The scent of something baking filled the air. She looked down at the mat by the door. 2 new paw prints, side by side, wet with morning dew. And just beyond the porch railing, a squirrel darted across the lawn, toy-sized, just daring one of them to chase it. Moxie and Murphy took off in tandem, barking in joy. Sandra leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, heart full. Sometimes love slipped through gates. Sometimes it barked at hedges. Sometimes it sat beside you in the quiet, waiting to be let in. And sometimes, when you were tired and lonely and thought nothing would change, it arrived muddy, wagging, and carrying a plush squirrel.
Dogs truly are the most loyal companions in our lives. What did you think of this heartwarming story? Let us know in the comments. Like the video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for daily emotional dog stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Click here to watch the next story of love, loyalty, and the incredible bond we share with our paw-some friends.